Thor and the Jotun Utgardsloki. One day, Thor decided to go and try his strength against an enormous fellow named Utgardsloki. He was the strongest of all the Jotuns. He was also known as the slyest of them all, so Thor asked Loki to come along. Utgardsloki's realm was far, far away, and they drove the whole day long in Thor's billy goat cart. With a great rumble, they stopped late at night at a little farm and asked for shelter. The farmer and his family were overcome by this great honor and scrambled about, trying to scrape together enough food for Thor. "Never mind, I have brought my own victuals," said Thor, and he butchered the goats, skinned them carefully, and had the meat cooked. "Eat your fill," he told the farmer and his family, "but be careful not to crack a single bone. Put them back neatly on the skins when you have gnawed the meat off." With that, everyone fell to, and nobody noticed that the farmer's son, Jalfi, cracked a shin bone on the sly and sucked the marrow. The next morning Thor swung his hammer over the skins and bones, and the goats jumped up as alive as ever, but one of them had a lame leg. "Who has dared to crack a bone?" Thor shouted, and he lowered his brows in a scowl so dark that everyone but Loki trembled. "Please don't kill us," the farmer begged. "As payment for the cracked bone, take my son Jalfi as your servant. He is a hard worker and can run faster than the wind." Thor accepted the offer, left his goats so the farmer could heal the injured one, and walked off, with Loki and Jalfi following. At nightfall they came to a forest in Jotunheim, with trees so tall their tops disappeared among the clouds. There wasn't a house in sight, and they did not like the thought of sleeping out in the open in Jotunheim. So they walked on. At last, in the darkness, they saw a very strange cabin that had neither smoke hole nor windows, and no front wall, but at least it would be a roof over their heads. So they went in, ate the food which Jalfi had brought, and lay down to sleep. In the middle of the night they were awakened by an ear-splitting din. They jumped to their feet and groped around in the darkness until they found a little side room. There Loki and Jalfi hid themselves, while Thor sat down outside to keep watch, hammer in hand. The whole night long there was such a growling and a snarling and a roaring that even Thor felt uneasy. When daylight came at last, he saw a gigantic fellow lying on the ground fast asleep. From his wide-open mouth came a deafening snore, and that was the din which had kept them awake all night. What they had taken for a cabin was one of the giant's mittens, and the little side room was the thumb. So huge was the giant that Thor hesitated to throw his hammer. Just then the enormous fellow woke up, yawned, stretched himself to the treetops, and looked around. "Well, well," he said, "that little runt down there with the hammer must be the mighty Thor himself. They call me Skrymir," he added. Then he sat down, untied his huge bag of food, and began to eat a tremendous breakfast. He did not offer a morsel to Thor, who had to be content with the bit of food that Jalfi carried in his little bag. When Skrymir had eaten his fill, he got up and proposed that they travel together, since they seemed to be going the same way. They might as well keep together and share their food, he said. Thor certainly had nothing against that, so the giant tied Jalfi's bag inside his big one, and threw it over his shoulder, and set off with mighty strides. Thor and his companions had to trot to keep up, and they were very hungry and tired when evening came. Skrymir threw his bag down and stretched out under a tree. "There, eat," he said. "I am still full, so I am going to sleep." But he began to snore as loudly as he had the night before. Thor and his companions threw themselves on the food bag, but as much as they tugged and pulled at the string, they could not undo the knot. At last it dawned on Thor that Skrymir was making fun of his famous strength. He shook with anger, grasped his hammer with both hands, stepped forward, and gave Skrymir a mighty blow on the head. Half in sleep, Skrymir mumbled, "Did a leaf fall on my head, or what? I hope you found the food to your liking, Thor, but why aren't you asleep?" Then he snored again. Well, Thor and his companions had to go to bed on empty stomachs, tired as they were, though they could not sleep, and Skrymir's snoring kept them awake. At last Thor jumped up, swung his hammer again, and brought it down on the giant's head with still greater force. Skrymir murmured, "What was that? It must have been an acorn falling on my head. But why aren't you sleeping, Thor?" And soon he was snoring louder than ever. Now Thor was boiling with rage. I swear I will make an end of him, he said. Swinging his hammer round and round, he brought it down on Skrymyr's head with a terrific crash. This time Skrymyr really woke up. Must have been a branch that hit me, he said, rubbing his head. Well, it is time to get up anyway. I turn off here, Thor, but I have enjoyed your company so much I will give you a friendly warning before I leave you. From your whispering, I know you are going to Utgardsloki. Take care. You thought I was good size, but he is taller than I, and he won't stand for any swaggering from an urchin like you. With that, he slung his sack over his shoulder and was off, leaving Thor, for once, feeling rather small and weak. Thor and his companions continued on their way, and at noon they came to a stronghold so big they had to bend their heads way down, their backs, to see the top of its walls. The huge gate was locked, but they managed to squeeze through between the bars and walked across the courtyard to a vast hall. The door stood ajar, and inside they saw many huge Jotuns sitting on 2 long benches facing the fire. The tallest of them sat in the middle, and the shortest at the ends. Biggest of them all was Utgardsloki, and he was simply enormous. Thor remembered Skrymyr's warning, and he and his followers went up to Utgardsloki and greeted him politely. For a while the Jotun did not seem to notice them, then he leaned forward and squinted at them. If I am not mistaken, that little fellow clutching a hammer must be Thor, the mighty thunderer himself, he said with a grin. In this hall there is no room for a man who can't hold his own in some kind of sport. Now, what games might you be good at? You and your friends. Loki stepped forth. I bet nobody in this hall can eat as fast as I can, he said. A noble sport, said Utgardsloki, and he told a smallish giant named Loki to come and try his skill at eating against Loki. A huge wooden trough piled with meat was brought in. Loki sat down at one side of it, Logi at the other. So fast did the meat disappear into their mouths, it looked as if it were being consumed by fire, and it wasn't long before their faces met right in the middle. But Logi had eaten not only the meat, but the bones in the trough as well, so it was clear who had won the contest. Utgardsloki shook his head in mock surprise, turned to Jalfi and asked what kind of sport he was good at. I can outrun any man in this hall, said Jalfi. A noble sport, said Utgardsloki, and he called for a fellow named Hugi and told him to race against Jalfi. They all went out into the courtyard to watch the race. Jalfi ran so fast one could barely see his legs. Still, he hadn't even run halfway when Hugi reached his goal. You ran fast, but not fast enough, said Utgardsloki. And now, he said, turning to Thor, we are eager to see what you can do, for we have heard great tales about you. I will drink with you, said Thor. He was thirsty and angry, and he was sure that not even Utgardsloki could swallow as much as he. Very well, said Utgardsloki. But I warn you, that my drinking horn is big. My tall men empty it in one swallow, the medium fellows in 2, and there wasn't one among the little ones down in the hall who cannot empty it in 3. Let us see how well you can do, Thor. An enormous horn was put before Thor. It wasn't so wide, but it was uncommonly long. He lifted it and took one long, deep draught. When he couldn't hold his breath any longer, he lifted his head out of the horn and saw to his surprise that it was almost as full as before. Utgardsloki laughed. Well drunk, he said. But had someone told me that Thor wasn't good for a bigger draught, I would not have believed him. Drink again. I know you will empty it this time. Without saying a word, Thor put the horn to his mouth and swallowed and drank until he could hold no more. Again he looked into the horn and saw that the mead had sunk a little, but that was all. Very well, said Utgardsloki. You did not put On too good a show. Perhaps you are better at something